There's an article out on the Hollywood Reporter today. It seems like the author is a big-time DC Comics fan and doesn't like the fact that he has to be a closeted DC Comics fan. He claims that all the fans just abandoned the characters and the heroes because the movies aren't doing well. And in the end, he kind of acknowledges a lot of the reasons that this has happened, but the article does ask, where have all the DC fans gone? And I don't think they've gone anywhere. I think we're just sitting here at home waiting for something good to happen. It's a very interesting thing, and I do believe the author comes to some seriously, severely flawed conclusion about why all this has happened. And I thought it was an interesting read, but he also makes some really good points. Blue Beetle is in theaters, though sadly it seems few know it. Is it the penultimate installment of the DCEU paving the way for Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, or is it the DCEU's first entry? You seem to know the answer to that one either, given Gunn's perplexing comment that Blue Beetle is the first DCEU character, but not the first DCEU film. Blue Beetle's opening weekend, among the lowest in the franchise's history, comes after a string of box office misses, including The Flash, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, Black Adam, and COVID-affected titles Wonder Woman 1984 and The Suicide Squad. As Gunn and Safran tee up their relaunch with a slate of film and television projects, pundits are wondering, where have all the DC film fans gone? I don't know much, but I know they haven't gone to the movie theater, if you know what I'm saying. They've had so many bombs in a row. And I am a DC Comics fan. I'm definitely a bigger DC fan than I am a Marvel fan. Better heroes, better universe, better stories, basically all around. When you go and you look at the best-selling like graphic novels that are out there, the DC Comics titles absolutely dwarf the Marvel Comics titles. Yes, Marvel has the better known heroes and the better known universe, even though it's not better in itself, but DC Comics have always had the better stories. And I think that's one of the real big failings. One of the reasons a lot of the DC Comics fans just aren't out there evangelizing the DCEU or really even buying into the DCU itself until they actually see it, because every time they decide to do these projects, they never really go to the source material and like faithfully adapt it. If you look at the MCU, like the really good stuff that's come out of the MCU, for the most part, it's been really good adaptations of the best comic book stories like of all times. When you look at the Iron Man trajectory, it starts out with Ironmonger, goes into Demon in a Bottle, then you get the like Extremist story from Warren Ellis. All three classics. Now the movies, especially the second and third ones, weren't quite as good as the comic books, but they were going to the best material and trying to provide really good movies based on that. When you go to Captain America, obviously you get like kind of like the origin story, which is mixed in with the Ultimate Universe Captain America, but then you get to the Bucky Barnes Winter Soldier story, absolutely blows everybody away. Then Marvel Comics Civil War, a big event that they actually scaled down for the movie, but I think it kind of helped it out, at least for the big screen itself. Felt like a mini Avengers film. Absolutely fantastic. And they really went out there and mined some of the best Captain America stuff to put onto the big screen. Now, when it comes to Thor, maybe not so much. First movie kicked ass. I don't think they delved into any of the good Thor stuff for the second and third movie. And by the time you get to the fourth one, they do go to the best modern Thor story, Gore the God Butcher. But unfortunately, Taika Waititi absolutely butchered that one. But I think that's one of the reasons that the MCU was successful, because they went out there and they found the best stories and they tried to tell the best versions of those that would make sense on the big screen. And they've never really done that, at least not in the DCEU. Like when you look at Zack Snyder, who I do not like, pretty much as a filmmaker, like I admit he's very talented. Dude does some amazing visuals. He collaborates with people that do really great sound stuff. But the best work that he's ever done has been faithfully adapting other people's stuff. Like his Watchmen movie is a pretty damn good adaptation of the Watchmen itself. Obviously they had to change the ending. The giant squid was never going to work, but that's a pretty good retelling of Watchmen, even if it wasn't as successful as I think Warner Brothers anticipated. You go to 300, that is a very faithful adaptation of Frank Miller's 300. Even if you go to like, what is it, Army of the Dead? Is that the one that he did, or is it Dawn of the Dead? Whichever one that was, James Gunn wrote the script for that and he directed it, and it seems like he can take other people's material and translate it into the big screen and do a good job. But once you get to like Man of Steel, I don't even know what the fuck that is based off of when it comes to comic books. That's not even really Superman. Yes, there are elements that make sense for the origin of Superman, but I don't even know where he mined it. He just mined the stuff that he wanted, and he just changed the character into what he thought a good version of Superman would be, and it turned out to be not all that great. Now, it did make money, but then you saw the law of diminishing returns happen there after that, and it just turned out that Zack Snyder didn't have a good feel for DC characters, and he didn't go out and find the right stories to mine. Even when you get to like Batman versus Superman, which I think absolutely blows, it like takes pieces from The Dark Knight Returns and The Death of Superman, two movies by themselves that should make like $1 billion each, because they're two of the greatest superhero stories of all time, two of the biggest blockbusters in comic book history, and you decided to merge them at the end of this really weird movie, and it never made any sense, and you're wondering why, well, people aren't very happy, because you didn't actually pay any respect to the source material, to the characters, to the universe, and they fucked it up from get-go. That's why the DC fans left. And they didn't all leave at once. A lot of them might have left after Man of Steel or Batman versus Superman. I think a lot more left after Justice League. But there are still movies that are doing well after that. When you talk about a Wonder Woman, which might have come out before Justice League. But certainly Aquaman came after, and that's the most successful one after that. But then everything just kind of falls apart, and there's no direction, because they never came to the DCEU for this shared universe with a clear, coherent plan, wanting to tell the best stories that have ever been told and translating them to the big screen. I think that's why a lot of people walked away. He later states, while the MCU has been able to create a fairly unified fan base, though not without its own share of sycophants and antagonists, nobody really has a strong idea of what DC fans want or who the fans really are. At the moment, it doesn't even feel possible for DC to have a celebratory DCU Hall H panel at San Diego Comic-Con. Certainly not one without a plane flying over the city with a banner proclaiming #sell Zack Snyder Justice League to Netflix. Because for some reason, there are a lot of people that are attached to Zack Snyder's vision for Justice League and the DC universe, which really don't fall in line with the characters, in the comic books themselves, which was going to turn a lot of people off. I think that was like the original sin of the DCEU, was not finding somebody that really loved the DC universe, that really loved the characters and felt like the best versions of the characters in the comic books were definitively the best versions of the characters, because we don't really get that in the DCEU. And you can see he didn't really go out there and decide, I think Batman Year One is the greatest story of all times. It would be even better on the big screen. What can we do to get that on the big screen? I think Man of Steel by John Byrne is the greatest Superman story of all times. How can we get that onto the big screen? Where can we find this amazing source material that works so well for the MCU? And they never really did that. It just became Zack Snyder's version of DC Comics. And it turns out, some of his casting was pretty good. Jason Momoa isn't really Arthur Curry. He's not that character. The Arthur Curry Aquaman in comic books is nothing like the Jason Momoa version of that character on the big screen, but it turned out all right, and people were happy with that. But when you look at Ezra Miller as the Flash, his version of Flash on the big screen doesn't even really remotely come close to what Barry Allen is in comic books, or even Wally West, or really any characters that's ever been the Flash in comic books. I don't even know who the fuck Ezra Miller is playing besides himself as the Flash. And that is Zack Snyder's doing. That was Zack Snyder's decision to do that. When you look at Henry Cavill's Superman, I think Henry Cavill is a very talented actor. I think Henry Cavill could have been one of the greatest Superman performers of all time. He never played Superman. He was fucking Hyperion. And that's really where they got all this stuff wrong. So the MCU, they really went to the basics. They went to the most important characters, and they told the most important stories that you would need to tell in order for them to all come together and for everyone to really accept them and be waiting for this Avengers movie. And they never did that. They never told the best stories of Superman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Batman, any of these characters, certainly not Flash, to make everyone, this groundswell of support really build up to where, like, oh my God, I can't believe Justice League is around the corner. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe they're at a Justice League movie now. Like, how did they get there so fast? They've only done 2 movies, right? Man of Steel, Batman versus Superman. They never really even did the origins of any of these heroes. Now we're getting Batman versus Superman, which is going to introduce Flash, Wonder Woman, Cyborg. Like, why is Cyborg on the team? Doesn't even make sense. So that's where this all falls apart. And while I do disagree, I think you could probably do a Hall H panel for the DCU, starring James Gunn talking about new information at San Diego Comic-Con, and people would be interested. I don't think you're going to get the reaction that Kevin Feige and the MCU has gotten over the past 10 years, where people were absolutely losing their minds at every single thing he put out. He wouldn't even put out a trailer. It would just be a goddamn logo, and people were like, oh my God, it's fucking the Keg Wars. I can't wait. And that was even after the MCU kind of started sucking. No, they don't get that response because they never had a plan and they never executed it. He later says, on one hand, you can look at the poor turnout for the past year of DCEU films as the lack of faith in the brand from general audiences and fans, to the point where even the good movies like Blue Beetle are getting brushed off. But on the other, perhaps this string of box office disappointments casts a lasso of truth around audiences, revealing that when it comes to movies, DC fans en masse aren't broad fans of the characters and the universe itself, but of the filmmakers. When we look back at the history of the most successful DC films and the ones that created passionate fan bases, there's almost always a distinctive filmmaker who can fit into auteur theory behind them. Richard Donner, Tim Burton, Burton, Christopher Nolan, Zack Snyder, James Wan, and Matt Reeves are all filmmakers with instantly recognizable styles and directorial traits. Like, I think this dude is so far off base here, it's not even funny. Yeah, Richard Donner certainly has a distinctive style, but I wouldn't say that Superman 78 resembles Lethal Weapon at all. Like, he went out there to make the best version of Superman that you could put on the big screen, and that's why that version of Superman is still loved to this day. People still talk about Christopher Reeves. Christopher Reeves hasn't been with us for a very long time, and we haven't gotten a version of Superman in the movies that has even come close to that for decades upon decades, and people still love that version of Superman. Now, Tim Burton, his version of Batman isn't Batman. It's certainly his version of the villains aren't the villains, but at the time that it came out, there weren't really superhero movies. It felt like a really big deal, and it was a big deal, especially when you were a kid. You know, I was 11 years old, you were trading cards around and stuff like that. You know, Christopher Nolan had a distinctive vision for Batman, but it was Christopher Nolan's Batman. It's not really the comic book version of Batman, and he didn't really adapt any of the stories either. And I think that's the thing, that they've given the directors kind of across the line with these movies so much free reign to just kind of do what they want with the characters. Why would I invest in the character or the universe when I'm really just getting this director's version of the universe? Why would I go and see Miguel Angel Soto's version of Blue Beetle? Like, what do I care about what he thinks about the DC universe? Christopher Nolan? Little bit different of a story. He's one of the greatest directors of all time. And they've kind of pushed that on the fans themselves. If Warner Brothers and DC Studios got together and said, we want to put out the very best versions of Superman, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, all these wonderful characters, and tell awesome, just kick-ass origin stories with really good portrayals of the characters that all led up to something that was playing out and made sense. And we're moving towards Blackest Night, right? Maybe that's the one you do. Or we're moving towards Crisis on Infinite Earths, you know, the first big event that DC Comics ever did. People would buy into that because you're getting the very best characters and the very best stories involving those characters. But Warner Brothers and the DCEU never did that. And once people realized that was never going to happen, there was no buy-in. And where are they supposed to buy in? Are we supposed to buy into the Arrowverse, which always has 2 good seasons for the most part, and then everything falls apart? Am I supposed to buy into the animated universe, which used to be absolutely bulletproof and everything was perfect? It was the best adaptations of the best stories. They would change it a little bit here or there. We don't really get that anymore. Am I supposed to buy into the video game universes? When's the last time we got a Batman Arkham Knight quality title? In video games either. We're not getting any of that stuff. And we're certainly not getting it from comic books. So we're all in a wait and see kind of pattern here, waiting for things to get better and for good versions of the characters. And because Warner Brothers has decided to put really great directors on these characters and give them a lot of leeway and not tell them, you need to tell the best version of this character, the best story that we have possible, and fit yourself into that. You know, you wrap that character around yourself because you're more important. That's why we are where we are, where the shared movie universe doesn't really mean anything. Warner Brothers isn't going to win everyone back, and it would be a mistake, one that the studio made in the past with the DCEU, to even think that they can. Attempting to make films for everyone resulted in the theatrical cut of Justice League 27, a film for no one. And it will take time to rebuild DC's fandom, unify the parts that can be unified, and simply let the rest go. Not everyone is going to be sold, and expecting a $1 billion Superman film out of the gate would be absurd. But of course, we've been down that road before. Perhaps the simplest lesson for this current regime comes from the film that spearheaded a DC cinematic universe in the first place, The Dark Knight. Sometimes people deserve to have their faith rewarded. I can tell you this right now, James Gunn, anyone at DC Studios, Peter Safran, David Zaslav, anyone in charge at Warner Brothers, Jim Lee, anyone important. If you actually make a good Superman film, everyone will show up. Superman is one of the most iconic heroes in the world. Everyone loves him. Do not bastardize the character. Do not decide, you know what, there isn't really a great comic book story out there to adapt, so we'll take some inspiration from it, but we're really just going to do our own thing. That's how you're going to divide the audience, and that's how you're going to tell people that the new DCU will be more of the same that you got from the DCEU. If you make a great movie that's kick-ass and everyone likes, people will show up whether they like the Zack Snyder DCEU, whether they are fans of Joss Whedon, whether they're really big fans of Ezra Miller's Flash, or maybe Gal Gadot was their favorite version of Wonder Woman, or maybe they like the Jason Momoa version of Aquaman, and they couldn't agree on anything else. Make one great movie, and that is so good across the board that it is absolutely undeniable, everybody will show up, because Superman is an iconic hero for a reason. People have been waiting. They have been waiting for something great to happen, and it just hasn't happened in the last 10 years, and that's all there is to to it. I think Man of Steel came into theaters just almost 10 years ago, like to the day, like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. It came out 10 years ago. And we haven't really gotten that shared vision of what the DC universe is. And I can't even tell you to this day what the DCEU ever was. Was it just an edgy version of DC Comics characters? Was it a director vision-led a movie universe? Was it a universe that wasn't supposed to be shared? Was it always supposed to be shared? It could have been all of those things, and it could have been none of those things, because it was always managed so piss poorly, it was always doomed to fail. In a lot of ways, James Gunn is really screwed over in this. And I don't think he's the right guy to make a Superman movie, but I would love to be absolutely proven wrong. Please prove me wrong, James Gunn. But he is absolutely in the worst situation you could possibly imagine, trying to get the DCU off the ground with Superman Legacy after just the decade of failure that was the DCU. I talked about it all right here. It's not his fault, but it is his burden to bear right now because he's the co-CEO of the studio. Definitely check this out right now. There's also a link in the video description.